Hi, Chris Montera here at EMS Today 2015, and I'm joined by Dr. Brent Myers, and we're going to talk about some really cool stuff when it comes to CPR and longer than 20 minutes. So, Dr. Myers?
Great, thanks for having me.
First tell people, like, who are you, why, and then where do you come from?
Sure. So I'm the medical director and the director of Wake County EMS in Raleigh, North Carolina. And the project we're getting ready to talk about was kind of born of necessity from that system, and we can get into that, but that's right. Kind of why I'm here.
And your background, how long have you been a medical director?
So I began there 12 and a half years ago, and have been and that's the only place I've ever been the medical director. Went straight from EMS fellowship at Chapel Hill into being the medical director there. Now, like I said, 12 and a half years.
Wow, very cool. So let's talk about the science. We know that there's a lot of us out there, and me included, that you go out, you do a couple rounds of drugs, nothing's coming back. We have great CPR, we're doing a lot of great mechanical stuff, and we call the patient.
Right.
Is that not where you're going? So
that was based on some papers in the mid to early 1990s.
Right.
And as you know, the ratio of CPR, the emphasis on, or de-emphasis rather, on ventilations, avoidance of hyperventilation, temperature management, and we could have a discussion about exactly what that means, but all of those things changed since that time. Right. The paper that was published then basically said, indeed, if you go 20 minutes, 25 minutes, beyond that, there's very little hope of neurologically meaningful survival. And so I think probably you, like me, we've all, unfortunately, I think, stood around the bedside and said, well, we could keep going and we might get a pulse back, but their brain will never work. Right, and that was always people's concern, is we're going to create this huge mass of persistent vegetative state.
Right.
And I think what we're getting ready to talk about is that, in fact, is not what happens.
Right. So we do all of that. We have great CPR. We do all of those things. Now, what have you done in North Carolina that will lead us in a different direction? So
this, like almost every invention, right, was born of necessity. So we have a closed medical direction shop, meaning that all of the medics in our system call either myself or one of the deputy medical directors on the phone for their medical direction. They don't call the hospital. Okay. And so consequently, we were all getting the following phone call with too much frequency. We're 30 minutes in, we're still in PEA, we have an end-tidal CO2 of 40, what do we do now? And we all would sit around the table the week later and debrief it, and we had no idea. Right. So we told the medics, call us and we'll not know together. And that was the best that we could do at the time. So we then contacted our friends at SAS, who, the statistical software people. Their office is in Wake County in our jurisdiction. So we gave them a call and said, look, this is what we've got. This is the question. How long should we be doing this? And they were able to control for all the background confounders of changes in protocol, all of the things that have happened over the years, and were able to analyze over 3,000 arrests. And when they did that, they said, oh, you should go at least 40 minutes and probably 60 minutes on some, and that your proportion of neurologically intact survivors remains constant throughout that entire time frame. Really? So these are non-clinical statisticians that we said, here's our outcome of interest, neurologically intact survival. Tell us how long we ought to do this. And they said, oh, at least 40 minutes. It didn't take them any time at all to say the data suggests at least 40 minutes. Now, some important caveats there. The first is that the clock starts at the time of dispatch. So this is not on scene arrival. Right. That way, everybody on the scene can be on the same page. We know when the call was dispatched, so we can look at our clock and figure that out. So we did that just from a consistency perspective. So that's important. The other piece is, it's not as if we work every arrest for 40 minutes or every arrest for an hour. And that's the next piece of the research that we're doing, is who should have these prolonged resuscitations. And that's what I was going to ask. Is there like a story piece, like, whoa, I went outside and came back in 15 minutes later and found him down. So you have an unknown downtime, things like that. We have not included that. And what we do is we allow our medics on the scene to make these decisions independently. Cool. And in bringing them back and asking, what are you doing to make these decisions? What we've learned is that somewhere about 25 or 30 minutes, they're doing an assessment. Right. And if they see PEA or a continued shockable rhythm, and they see what they call a good end-tidal, and we'll come to that in a minute, but a good end-tidal CO2, then they keep going. Okay. If they don't see those factors, then they move to consideration of termination. And again, they do that on their own. That does not require medical control. The medical control calls that we were getting were just for advice. Right. It is certainly within their purview to either continue or terminate on the scene. So what did they mean by good end-tidal? And that's what we're trying to figure out. So I'll tell you from an anecdotal perspective, it is either an end-tidal at that 20 to 25 minute time frame of 15 or 20 or greater, or it is an increasing end-tidal compared to the initial. regardless of the value.
Fair.
So we're getting more than we had before.
Right.
What we have sent over now to SAS for the next round of analysis is the first end title, the end title closest to 30 minutes, the highest in the entire chart, and the lowest in the entire chart, and are asking them to create a predictive model based on that. So that should be done by summer. That's what we're waiting on to really publish this whole thing, because in the absence of that guidance, I'm afraid that people would try to take obvious asystolic arrest all the way out to an hour without any other consideration. Right. So we're trying to make it all one package to say that this is what happened and this is how we kind of made those decisions.
So do you then see, okay, we're at that 20-minute mark. We have all of those good factors built in. Now we got to make a decision. Do we continue to do CPR using a mechanical device, driving down the road to get to a cath lab? Is that where you're heading?
So that's a great question. That is an entirely separate research question. Because there are two pieces to that. One of those is who is eligible to go to cath lab and likely to benefit. And then, as you've probably heard earlier here, and you'll continue to hear, there's also this notion of going onto ECMO, right? Going on immediate emergent bypass in the ED, which our friends in Singapore and lots of other places are doing all the time now. So the question is, from a public health perspective, a population health perspective, if you will, doing resuscitations on the scene saves the most. Now we have to get sophisticated enough to say, out of that group, which subset might benefit from something that's at the hospital? And I just don't think we're smart enough to do that yet.
Okay.
So for right now, we are concentrating on on-scene resuscitation for these folks. Eventually, you're right, we're going to be able to say, there's this little group over here with some decision-making algorithm in the background, decision support that helps us say, this one would benefit at the cath lab, this one might be a candidate for ECMO, and anecdotally, when you talk to the folks from Singapore, that really works for pulmonary embolus. That's kind of where they're seeing some help. So they can get you on that bypass, they can get in surgery, get the clot out, and then eventually wean you back off.
Right.
So but those are all little anecdotal stories. We don't have case series yet. We don't clearly have randomized trials. Very important question, but today, if it was me or my loved one, I would say stay right there on that scene, because we don't know enough, and we know we would lose a lot if we took them all.
Right, exactly. So use your crystal ball for me a minute. Where are we at with this in 10 years?
I think in 10 years, the biomedical equipment at the patient's bedside will give us decision support. And it will say, this patient with everything that you've got, time to stop. This patient with everything you've got, they need to go to the cath lab. This patient, you need to stay right here and continue working. And that's not that far-fetched. And that ain't going to be 10 years.
It's not,
The next thing we're sending over to SAS once we roll up this project is, since mid-2012-ish, all of the end title data is in there, not just single points. So SAS will be able to literally, with simple calculus formula, figure the area under the curve of CO2 generated during the arrest, and you can see very quickly how that could become a very nice decision support tool. We've made a boatload of CO2, keep trucking. There's nothing in the bucket, you're done. And right now it's just hard to visualize that on the scene, but that's not hard math. And I think some real decision support in real time from a technological perspective that can be then coupled with the story of how long were they away and so forth and so on, and we'll really be able to make some good decisions.
Very cool. You guys are doing awesome work.
Well, thank you very much. We have a good time.
Dr. Myers, tell people how they can find out more information about you and get your contact information.
So everything that we try to be very transparent, put it all on the web. So if you just go to www.wategov.com/EMS, it's all right there.
Very cool. And I think that's one thing that we, those of us that are trying to innovate and push things out, we're not keeping it, hidden away, and we really want the story out there because it's just going to help other people.
Right, awesome. and our mistakes are up there just as good as our successes, so you can learn from both sides. They're all right there on the website.
Well, thank you, Dr. Myers, for joining us, and thank you for joining us for this episode on JEMS.com, and we're coming to you from the Physio Podcast Studio at EMS Today 2015.